Hello, folks.
Hey, everybody.
This is MMT in the Public Purpose. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Firestone, and your other host is Lisa Theobald,
Hi, everybody.
also known as at 50 Lines Only, a profound political analyst. Our guest for tonight is Jeff Epstein,
Yay, he's here.
Hi guys.
a truly excellent scholar, of MMT, self-taught for much of his exposure to MMT.
Mm.
By dint of hard work, he recently was selected as a Levy scholar for the last Levy summer school.
Oh, and you're going to Torrance. You're taking the classes from Torrance, aren't you?
I am. Second week.
Even
Just had our second week. Yeah.
I was accepted in that, but my life went upside down, so I'm going to.
Oh.
No, I'm going to go next quarter if I can.
Cool. I look forward to seeing you.
Me too.
So, our topic for tonight is, again, fiscal myths and fiscal truths. This is part 2. We went through roughly 2.25 or 2.5 pages of fiscal myths and fiscal truths last week with Matthew Waldy as our guest. And now we have Jeff, who I think will be equally stimulating as a guest. And so the way we're going to conduct this is I'm going to state a fiscal myth and then a fiscal truth. And then I'm going to open it up to Lisa and to Jeff to comment on my version of a fiscal myth and my version of fiscal truth. And I know both of them will have a lot to say, and that we're going to end up with a very scintillating conversation. So let me pull up the first of our fiscal myths that we'll cover today. And this myth says, if the government borrows more money, then the bond markets will increase the government's interest rates. And the truth of it, stated very briefly, is the bond market can't increase the government's interest rates by their actions.
Sorry about that.
That is Lisa in the background. She's adjusting her camera, I think. But interest rates are determined by the Federal Reserve and its coordination with the Treasury, the Treasury spending and issuing its savings certificates, otherwise known as, quote, debt instruments, also otherwise known as Treasury securities or bonds, or I guess there are some other terms as well. So that's the first myth and the first truth. So Lisa and Jeff, have you anything to add to those short statements?
Scott Fulweiler wrote a great paper on this called Policy Variable. I'm going to find it. Give me one moment. I'm going to find it undetermined.
It's something like interest rates and fiscal sustainability.
Policy. No, that's another one. Yes, but policy interest. Why when the interest rate on the national debt is a policy variable and printing money does not apply. That is like the definitive paper where whenever there's any question about interest rates, private chat comments. I can put comments here. How do I can I write comments? Anyway, I have the link to that paper. If there's any way for me to put it on, I can put it in the comments on YouTube, right?
Yes.
That's what I'm gonna do.
And
Or
you can dump it in the private chat.
And
Oh, there you go.
then
Okay, well, I'll put it in the private chat. So this paper by Scott Fullweiler is called "When the interest on the interest rate on the national debt is a policy variable and printing money does not apply." That is the definitive paper that I share whenever anyone questions, that the interest rate is controlled by bond vigilantes or whatever. So the interest rate, the target rate is defined by the FOMC, the voting members of the central bank, which in the US is the FOMC board for the Federal Reserve. And they choose a target rate, and they have the infinite capacity to create and delete their own bonds. Treasury has the infinite capacity to create and delete its own bonds. The Federal Reserve, the central bank, has the infinite capacity to put them on auction and for selling and for buying, so they can defend any rate that they want at any length of time. So bond vigilantes have zero chance. They will comply if they want to not go out of business. And there are also primary lenders, which I know a little bit about, which is there are certain banks that are made into primary lenders. Is that what it's called? Primary something, and they are required to
primary
purchase
dealers.
and they are required to purchase bonds at a reasonable rate when they are put up for sale. So bond vigilantes, the only power that bond vigilantes have is the power that the people on the Federal Reserve want them to have, because they don't do anything about it.
Okay, please explain to those of us in the audience who are not aware, what is a bond vigilante?
Well, I only know vaguely, but basically, it's just a rich person in the economy who is supposedly powerful enough to threaten the central bank, and or the community of these people who invest in bonds, that can somehow coordinate between all of themselves in such a fashion that it will threaten the central bank. So currency issuers can somehow have the power to threaten the currency users somehow have the power to threaten the currency issuer, who has the power to create and delete bonds and money at will at infinite amounts, and also, when it comes down to it, have the backing of the military when it really comes down to it. But currency users supposedly have this power over that entity. It's really kind of silly.
The power with respect to what?
Being able to manipulate the market.
They have the power to override that the FOMC can't choose.
Okay, just a little more background then for those. Okay, the Fed sets interest rate targets that it wants to maintain. And what the bond vigilantes are trying to do is to fight the interest rate target the Fed has set up and is trying to maintain, either to raise that interest rate target or to lower that interest rate target. In other words, that's what basically going against the Fed, is about.
So manipulating the yield of bonds put onto the market.
Right.
In other words, a 30-year bond would have an interest rate when issued that would effectively give you, let's just keep it simple, 5% yield over 10 years, right?
Right.
And so I am assuming then that there would be a buying and a selling market, a secondary market, where they could potentially manipulate the yield on the bond, because it's what the market's going to bear, right?
Yes, the myth says that they can do that. That they can somehow raise the interest rates against the will of the Federal Reserve.
If we have any historical precedent for that?
Yes, there has been historical precedent for that. where people have tried that and they've lost their shirts.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. There's no successful
The
impact.
isn't the Widowmaker something? The Widowmaker in Japan, wasn't that an example?
That was an example. Yeah, the Widowmaker, right? In
Yeah.
Japan also, where they tried to do it, in Japan. But there was a famous U.S. investor not too many years ago. I think this was in the period of 2000 to 2008, where they tried to fight the Fed as well and lost billions of dollars in the attempt. The
Well,
reason why is because the Fed and the Treasury Department collaborating together uh, can simply maintain whatever market rate the Fed wants to maintain. That's why Scott and others uh, say that uh, the interest rate is a policy variable.
And policy variable means simply they choose it to be whatever they want it to be.
Yes, that they can manipulate it, that the market is not controlling it. It's
Yeah,
the Fed
it's the
and the
right.
Treasury collaborating together that's controlling it.
well, and then if somebody did try to do that, let's just say that the conditions were perfect and somehow there was this massive hoard and a massive demand to try and force something like this to happen, they can shut trading down.
But I mean, yes, that's true. But they have the infinite capacity to create and delete. So the what it would take to get to that point would be, I think, would be very unlikely. But yes, if it was that case, then sure they could also do that. They could also slow it down. They have the power of the law and the legislation, and they could do whatever the heck they want. But I don't think it would. I think the chance that it would reach the point where they would shut it down would be extremely unlikely because
Well, I
they
heard the
can.
other day, though, that there are 62 people that own more wealth than the bottom half of the world. So I
That
understand that this is a real long shot, okay? But I also understand that at the end of the day, there is a volume of trade on bonds, and the bonds that were, you know, paid off, and it would depend now, but 10 years ago, we did not have 62 people walking around the world that had more money than the bottom half of the rest of the world.
and
So,
but I think you're right. But even if they have, it's just a matter of a couple more zeros, and no matter how many zeros they have at the end of their bank account, the the consolidated government, the Federal Reserve, and the Treasury have the power to make more zeros than that. So there's really they can always there's no amount of money, even if they had 90% of the money in the world, that the currency issuer couldn't challenge. So I mean, generally we're all in agreement, but
or they can come in and buy everything, right? I mean, there's plenty of ways to manipulate this. The question, though, is, I mean, we've seen stock dumps that crash the market by one individual, right? Crash an entire sector. When we were in banking and the market was booming, and then we hit the crash and people got wonky, and in the midst of all of that, one person came in and dumped a bunch, and the whole sector went kaboom, and nobody expected it, right? So I understand the bond market is different, but I think it's we've gotten to a tipping point here where I'm not necessarily sure, because I've been there in the banking sector, in we're the masters of intelligence when it comes to finance, the same people that came up with the idea that crashed the housing market and the credit default swaps. you know I think we're in uncharted territory here, not when it comes to the bond market. I'm just talking about the sheer amount of wealth that is aggregated in the hands of people right now. I think we need to be more concerned about that than maybe we are.
I certainly agree. But there is someone that allowed that consolidation, that consolidation to happen.
Oh yes, that's who we need to be afraid of.
Let me just point out that, okay, let's say there's a particular interest rate that the Fed wants to maintain. Okay, and it's 1.5%. Okay, and these guys who want to raise interest rates try to raise interest rates, then I guess I telegraphed that. I said, these guys, they're mostly guys, actually.
Oh, sure, you can give them all the credit. That's cool
Yeah,
with me.
I give them all the credit. Okay, so let's say they buy all the bonds. Okay, and they'll resell bonds, but they'll resell bonds only at 2.5%, or only, okay, at 3%. Okay, so they've cornered the market on bonds, and they're trying to fight the Fed that is being helped by the Treasury. And so the Fed and the Treasury together say, hey, here's 3 trillion more in bonds that we're issuing right now, and we're setting the interest rate at 2%. That's our rate that we're trying to maintain. So then the big boys, in order to maintain where they're doing, have to come back in and buy the 3 trillion. So then the Treasury and Fed say, screw you, we're issuing 20 trillion. There's going to reach a point where the people who want to sell it at 2.5 trillion are going to lose their shirt. They've got a huge amount of money, but they don't have more money or more bonds than the Treasury Department can issue. Because when it comes to bonds, the Treasury Department has the printing press.
Mhm.
Okay, so there it is. It's up to the collaboration of the Treasury Department, okay, and the Fed. And in that way, it's a policy variable.
And the only power that those bond vigilantes, wannabes have is the power that those in charge at the central bank and treasury, the consolidated government, allow them to have.
Yeah.
The only power that they have is, when you don't regulate something, that's just another form of regulation. That when you don't regulate something, then that's just you with the power to regulate something sitting on your hands and not doing anything about it and allowing, those on top to exploit those on bottom and so on. So,
Okay, so if we look at the numbers here, the 62 richest people in the world are worth what? 3 trillion, 5 trillion, 6 trillion?
I would think it's more than that, Joe, because they're worth more money than the other half of the world. Than half of the world's wealth. Now, I don't
So
know.
what's the world's wealth? About 100
That I
trillion?
don't know. That I don't know. This
Yeah,
was a
I think
topic.
it's something on the order of 120 trillion right now,
Okay.
something like that. Okay, so the Treasury Department has already issued $30 trillion worth of securities that still have to be liquidated.
Right. I mean, you've got to come up with liquid. There's a lot of things going on here, for sure.
There's a lot of things going on.
For
here.
sure.
Okay.
A lot of moving parts, but a lot of moving parts out in the world right now. From a multilateral dynamic that's being formed, right?
Right. Okay. So Lana points out, Mike Norman says, don't fight the Fed. Yeah, that's a common aphorism on Wall Street.
Poor Mike. He and I would really clash.
Oh, would you clash with Mike?
Not fighting the Fed. I don't. I mean, they're going to raise another 75 basis points tomorrow.
Oh, well, what he's talking about is don't fight the Fed in terms of trying to control the bond market.
Oh, okay.
See, that's what he's talking about.
Okay.
If you want to stay, if
Well,
you want to stay profitable, if you want to stay profitable, then
then
don't
don't fight
pretend that
the
you
Fed.
can. Then don't pretend that you can overpower an issuer.
Yeah.
Good. All good
So
things.
Amber Lee is popping in to say hello. Hi, Amber Lee.
Hello, Amber.
It was nice to see you
Yeah,
at the
good.
meeting the other day.
Wait,
Oh,
Lana's.
Lana's saying no, that's not what he means.
Oh no, that's not what he
Right.
means. Oh, what does he
That
mean?
Well,
he was a
what
Wall
is she
Street trader.
referring to? What is she referring to? She needs to
Yeah, it's
elaborate,
all
and then we'll.
contextual.
But
Yeah.
she says he was a Wall Street trader. Yeah, I know he was a Wall Street trader. In fact, he was a trader on the floor, wasn't he? He was one of the guys in the pit, which I'm sure is how he got that big smile. Anyway, let's get to the second one of these myths for tonight, which is it is not news that the national debt presents a daunting challenge. The public debt is growing faster than the economy, a trend that cannot be sustained, unquote. The truth is, dealing with the national debt, quote unquote, isn't a financial problem, daunting or otherwise, since the government can issue as much money as it wants to if it chooses to do that. However, there is a political/educational problem in getting this done because people don't understand that the government can do that, or do this, I should say, and also because many interests benefit from austerity policy and don't want to change.
Hmm.
So there is also a messaging problem related to the truth about the government money and how it is created. So, comments, folks.
I agree, but I don't know if I'd call it a messaging problem. I think I'd call it a deceitful problem that we have.
That you would call it, did you say a people problem?
Deceit.
Oh,
It's deception.
yes, it is deception. And yes, there is deceit involved.
Absolutely. I mean, this came up today, earlier today, and there is there's a difference between the average person who uh, trusts what people are telling them because they have their sources and they feel that this is somebody that I can go to and I can trust what they're saying. Uh, but we have a lot of manipulators in the news media now, in the federal government, elected officials, uh, campaigns, dark money interests, and it goes and it goes and it goes. And it's always been there, but it has escalated itself into something now that it is, you can tell there are certain factors involved, but I can pick out a a campaign pitch to see how it's going to be received as to whether or not they're going to make it into an argument and have one of these candidates put it out there. They test that stuff, right? And you can feel it. You can see it now. It's like, oh, I stumbled into something that they're going to try out because, oh, look at this. These are all the bots that follow along and troll the campaign opponent and the promoters of the opponent. And you can see it, and they're coming out with the same types of talking points that are blatantly fed to people, like this concept of big government, right? Nobody ever defines what that really technically means,
I
but
know.
it is bantered around as if the government is too big because we spend too much on programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right?
All
And so
crap.
they say we want to cut this stuff. The truth of it is, They have absolutely no intention of cutting the federal funding to those programs. What they want to do is privatize that stuff so that they can profit off of it. But they run around and tell people that government is too big,
The
and
whole con-
people bought into this.
the whole concept of government being too big is nothing more than anti-government, anti-poor propaganda, because it implies that the only things that government can do are always inherently bad.
Right,
So
exactly.
it is ridiculous to say that we should have less of something. We should have less politicians. We should have shorter term. We should have term limits. We should have smaller government. It's all ridiculous stuff. We should increase the good and decrease the bad. We should
Well,
do more
I'm in
good. We should
favor
do
of
less bad. The
I'm in
idea.
favor of Supreme Court term limits, but that's another argument.
Uh, you were conversing with somebody on Twitter today, Lisa,
Hmm.
uh, who was wanting real small government, right? She was wanting to drown the government in the bathtub.
I came across a situation, and Jeff, you may be familiar with this, maybe not, but Pennsylvania's state pension fund, big fund, huge, of all the state workers, has been in crisis, mismanaged, and it's known for like 25 years. And every so many years, it comes up in the news and there's a big discussion and nothing ever happens. They've mismanaged the fund on purpose. Something is going on right now. I don't know if there is a law that they passed that they have to come through and reconcile this, but they're coming up against some sort of something is going on that this is on the table again, because I've seen it a couple of times now in local reporting. And somebody came along and said, I really hope that the Republicans win and they pass taxation so that pension fund and those pensioners get taxed on those pensions as income. In other words, we're just going to cannibalize the pension fund because we can't come up with any money to put into that pension fund, as they are fiduciarily obligated, by the way, to have done so. Heads should roll. People should. I mean, what they have done is heinous. It's short, like I hate to speak out of turn, but I want to say $71 billion, and that's been allowed to happen. So the argument here was by this individual who was pretending to be, a poor young kid. I cannot believe how badly they treat younger people in this state, and these pensioners have these pensions, and they should just tax the hell out of them, basically, with the context. I can't even believe that is the kind of rhetoric that people are throwing around. All state workers now, currently, and all retirees that are walking this planet, and any spouse who potentially may get residual benefits after the death of their spouse from the pension, if they would all be able to see this stuff immediately, we'd never get another Republican elected in this state. But this is the kind of fodder that's coming out of some of these extremists that are running here in Pennsylvania. And it all comes back to the same thing. So I went back and forth with this individual saying, what are you talking about? You want to literally cannibalize a pension fund that the Republican held legislature has deliberately mismanaged, raided through attrition. We've all known about this for 25 years. I moved out of the state for 25 years, came back, same problem. Are you kidding?
They basically borrowed money from the pension fund to pay for other things.
So or they didn't fund it to pay for other things, right?
They didn't fund it to pay for other things. Okay.
So this argument was
mismanaging it for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
In order to replace money in the pension fund, they want to tax the pensioners
Yeah, yeah.
after they mismanaged it.
So my point is that when I put out methodically that there are other ways, lots of them, that they could fund this, they are just choosing not to. And this person comes back and said, "Well, where's the money going to come from?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's try a couple things. How about the fact that there is a tax dodging equity investment loophole? There's all kinds of equity investment going on all over the place right now. We can tax the heck out of that. How about we stop doling out $1.5 billion worth of tax credits on the backs of every individual that pays taxes in the state for a, let's see, it was Royal Dutch Shell, and then it was bought out, I think, by LNG. Might be wrong on that. It might not be LNG, but somebody, natural gas, maybe. I can't remember the company, but they bought this pipeline and thus the development of the cracker plants that were going to use the gases from the fracking beds to produce plastic, if you can stand it, while they're putting millions of metric tons of volatile organic chemicals into our air. And in this typography, it's inverted. We can't clear the pollution out, which explains why we've got all these cancer hospitals and centers going up all around here, waiting for the damn thing to open. And I said, how about we stop the tax credits for this, and let's tax the hell out of them for the impacts that they're going to have on the pollution and the health hazards that we have here. And I used another one that was a terrific example. But there's oh, how about the money from the COVID relief that Biden gave to all the states and said, fund your police officers? That was a windfall. No state was expecting that money. None of them. So how about that money comes into the state and the people in charge of the purse say, hey, you know what? We got $21 billion over here in the state pensions to make up. Maybe we should just dump it in there. That's going on all the time. All the time. But they have convinced their voters that the only way to rectify this is to tax themselves. Because where's the money going to come from? And I made the point that this Republican platform, and I only say Republican because I have and have had for a very long time a gerrymandered state that controls our legislature. Okay? That's the only reason that I'm calling them out. But I promise you that there are Democrats that are right in there with them. The point I'm trying to make is that there is this vein of talking points which states that they want smaller government. They don't want smaller government. They want to privatize the funding that the government has been providing to the states to run government and state subsidized programs. They just want to privatize that out so that the corporations can profit off of it. And when your infrastructure starts falling or you've got a problem in the state, they're either going to let it dilapidate or they're going to raise your taxes. And if we could make that connection with people and utilize that, lift the veil, explain it simply, there is no such thing as reducing the federal dollars that these corporations want to get their hands on so that they can suck their profit out of it. They're never going to shut off Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, folks. They're just going to put themselves in the middle and they're going to suck it dry. And they're doing that with everything. They'll do it with your school funding. This whole charter school thing, that whole idea is to be able to take the federal money and even the state money that you pay, your school taxes, and allow people to come in and say, hey, you know what? I don't want to send my kids to the public school. I want the voucher so I can go over here and put them in the charter school. So what happens? You starve the public school system. Same thing. What happens then? You either dilapidate the school system down to nothing, or you've got to raise taxes. And this is a big ruse, and they've fallen for it.
Yeah, and that's especially true at the state level because no deficit spending.
Exactly.
So you got to come up with the money by taxing.
Exactly. There's no other way. Either that or you live in a slum. Pick.
Yep.
So anyway, that's my experience.
Okay, shall we move on to the next one?
I'd like to. I have some comments about the national debt.
Please.
Okay. So to review the myth, which one are we at? It is not news that the national debt It is not news. The national debt presents a daunting challenge. The public debt is growing faster than the economy, a trend that cannot be sustained. So first, issuing debt is a choice. So if it causes any problems, we are choosing to have those problems. That's number one. Number two is I'd like to just briefly explain the difference between the national debt, and there are two, I think, like really revealing characteristics that show just how different it is. So speaking of, so there's national debt and personal debt or citizen debt. So personal debt, the bank, the lender, and the borrower. The lender has way more power than the borrower. The lender has the powers of the state at its disposal if you don't pay your loans back. So the power imbalance between the lender and borrower is very large in the personal context.
Yes.
There is a higher authority above both the borrower and the lender. The bank has the power of the state. We don't in that context if we don't pay our loans back. And in addition to, the government officials are bribed by bankers, so that's even more power. Now, national debt, pretending that the United States, borrows its own money from China, so China is the so-called lender. The borrower and the lender, the power imbalance between them is virtually none. Roughly speaking, China and the United States have the same power. So what does that mean for a lender and a borrower that have exactly the same power, roughly the same power? If the lender doesn't pay, if the borrower doesn't pay it back, then they're equals fighting each other. That's a completely different situation. The lender does not have a lot of power over the borrower in that sense. And also, there is no higher authority in that relationship. There's no higher authority above China and the United States. So those two differences to me show that comparing the national debt to personal debt is like comparing the law of gravity to a law that Congress creates. They're just completely different things. They just happen to have the same name. So Congress could try and repeal the law of gravity. They could actually do that, but I don't think the scientific law of gravity is going to care much about that. So it just shows that the difference between the two, that conflating these two ideas as if national debt is somehow proportional to or quantitatively different to personal debt, is completely wrong. It's qualitatively different, meaning it has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's just a different animal. So that's my take on the national debt. So if the national debt causes a problem, we choose that problem because we don't have to issue it to begin with.
What I'd like to comment on is the idea that we don't have to issue the debt, because I think people don't understand that. In other words, they don't understand that the government can deficit spend or can spend without recourse to taxation and without recourse to issuing debt instruments, because it can simply create the money.
Monetary financing, right?
Okay, it creates it. Congress under Article 1, Section 8, has unlimited power to create money. And so, for example, it could order the Federal Reserve to fill the Treasury Department's account with the amount of an appropriation that Congress makes. It can do that up front by adding a couple of uh, longish sentences to an appropriations bill. Okay, now it's never chosen to do that, but it has the power to do it. Furthermore, the Treasury Department can issue money because the Congress passed a coin law in 1996, which gives the Secretary of the Treasury the authority to order the mint, okay, to create a coin with an arbitrary face value chosen by the Secretary of the Treasury. So if the Secretary of the Treasury chooses to place a face value of $100 trillion on the coin, and the mint creates that coin, and then the Treasury takes that coin over to the mint's account, the Federal Reserve in New York, then the Federal Reserve would essentially be mandated by the deposit of the coin to credit the mint's account with $100 trillion in reserves. So there are mechanical ways for the Congress to create, to issue as much money as it wants to. And then those reserves can be spent into the economy.
When needed.
And technically, then when they're spent into the economy, they constitute part of the money supply. So money can actually be created by the government in that way. So since that's the case, the national debt is neither a financial problem nor a daunting problem. It's a problem created by government because government has chosen to issue debt instruments when it could have simply created money without issuing debt instruments.
The personal debt, a loan from a bank in a personal context, it is impossible to separate the concept of debt from that loan. Money from a bank is inherently debt. You can't, it's one and the same, it's an inseparable concept. In the national context, debt is parallel with money creation. They choose to do it. It's a choice. Debt in the national context is a choice. And that coin shows that they could get rid of it in an instant if they wanted to, which just emphasizes that debt in the national context is a choice. It is separable from the money itself. They choose to create it and they choose to give the appearance that it's inseparable when in reality the coin and the fact that it's a choice. I mean, it's obviously it's a choice. So any problems related to that choice are therefore also a choice.
All right. And so the amount of the debt, the amount of what's called the national debt, which is the sum of the principal of the debt instruments that have been issued and never repaid by the government, uh, that is a policy variable, as much as the interest rate is a policy variable, because that amount can be controlled by the government. But over the next 6 months, perhaps $6 trillion of the debt can be paid off if the government wants to do that and not replaced, okay, with any additional debt. Okay, over 3 years, something like 70 to 80% of the national debt could be repaid if the government chooses to do that. So the national debt, which is supposed to be an insoluble problem, a daunting challenge, is just a policy variable manipulable by the government if the people in the government choose to do that.
Right. And it is anticipating that people misinterpret that to be as if it's the debt, the quality of the debt in their personal context. They want them, it is, average people take that to mean debt in the personal context and then apply that meaning to the national government. They
Right.
conflate
And then they
those
look
two
at the
concepts.
government as absolutely ridiculously irresponsible.
Yes, they're charging the government with fiscal irresponsibility.
No, that happens in the pension plans in Pennsylvania, in the state. It does not have, it doesn't issue its own money. It's not a monetary sovereign.
And I wonder how much of those problems in that state, because of those corruption, which is terrible, but who allows it to happen? The neglect, the withholding of what is easily doable at the national level is withheld, which allows these terrible things to happen in Pennsylvania. They don't have to happen at all because they don't have to, pensions don't have to exist. It could all be taken care of in the national. So all of these terrible things are terrible, but what's even more terrible is that they are allowed to happen in the first place.
Agreed. Because when the one thing that does relate loosely, slippery, but it does sort of relate, is that this reduction in size of government is starving our regulatory agencies. That's how we get here. That's why the EPA has no more teeth, right? I mean, we can go on and on. I mean,
Right.
when was the last time
When
the
they starve the regulatory agencies, they starve a major tool in the control of inflation.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And so increasing government spending to increase the funding of those agencies will reduce inflation.
Absolutely.
Increasing government funding, that's an example where clearly increasing government funding will reduce inflation.
Absolutely.
Bigger government in that particular sense.
One thing about this, which really burns my butt, is that
whoa, that's a sentence I never thought I would hear Joe say.
That
was a sentence I never thought I would hear Joe Firestone say. But go on. I will try and contain myself.
Okay. There are these interest groups in Washington, like the Peterson Foundation. Okay, and the committee for, what is it? It's the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Okay, I've heard of that. Does that still exist?
That is the Maya McGinnis committee. She still runs it. Okay. They're there every year testifying before the Congress.
Oh, I know. I can see her now. Yep.
The Peterson Foundation, they're continuously publishing stuff about how large the debt is going to be by 2050, or how large it's going to be by the end of the 21st century. How this burden, in fact, they're constantly publishing these graphs and these figures, making it clear that right now, every citizen of the United States owes $92,000 because we have this big debt that's going to have to be paid off by taxing people. So the average tax bill is $92,000 a person.
How did our government get to this place where they allow this kind of crap to be spewed?
Not only do they allow this kind of crap to be spewed, they have these people come before the congressional committees every year to spew this kind of crap.
I just put a link to an article in the chat, and a quote from that article is, the CRFB wants the government to suppress private consumption so a greater share of economic output accrues to the private owners of existing capital. Federal spending threatens that model. So their mission is to stop the federal government, the national government, from helping anyone that needs help. And important, Polanyi, something, an incredible lesson from Polanyi, Great Transformation, the book. They say they want
All right,
smaller
so
government.
it's I should clarify. It's from Carl Polanyi,
Polanyi, Carl Polanyi.
as opposed to Michael Polanyi.
Oh, well, the author of the Great Transformation, whoever that happens to be. Carl Polanyi.
Yes, Carl
Yes,
Polanyi
of course, it's Carl Polanyi.
is the Great Transformation.
They say, though, the free marketeers, the advocates of the unregulated market, say they want a smaller government, but they don't.
Exactly.
They don't. They want a government that is bigger for them and smaller for everybody else. But it's also true that a unregulated market, first of all, is just another form of regulation. Not regulating the market is just another form of regulation. But unregulated market requires an even larger government because it is required to suppress the reactions of those who are suffering the consequences wrought by the unregulated market.
Yes,
They don't want a smaller government.
To be specific about it, they want a very large military and a very large police force.
Police force, yes.
To protect them,
Mm-hmm.
because they're trying to maintain an unregulated market that allows them to do everything they want to do, no matter how corrupt or no matter how harmful to the populace.
And it takes an incredible amount of government to suppress the reaction that people give to the suffering that causes. They don't want a smaller government. The idea of a smaller government is just a sham. They want a larger government. It's just larger for them and smaller for us.
And I'm going to add on to this because this is really important. And I think that, hey, as many people that we can touch to hear these kinds of things, and I hope we say them over and over and over again over the next 2 years, because that's how much time we've got.
In my
opinion. They also, the states now have gotten involved in this. They yell that they want smaller government. What they really want is a transfer of power to the states. And it's being allowed. So really what we are looking at is more oppression, this debt clock, and the amount of money that every individual in the United States owes because of this quote unquote national debt, which by the way are assets in the private sector. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Okay. We're going to starve the public programs that we all utilize, be it libraries or schools or whatever that is, right? While they're building up the police forces, they're going to raise taxes on people in the states because they're going to profit off of, they're going to get themselves in the middle of all of these programs and suck profits out of it, which oppresses people, oppresses your standard of living, wages, keep all of this stuff down, right? So what you're going to end up with are fiefdoms. This is how you end up with lots of power in a state. Like part of the reason why, we don't have any COVID policy now. It's just, go to work and go catch COVID.
Yeah.
We don't care because we can't handle it anymore, because that power now was stripped from even the governors and pushed all the way down into municipalities, right? Now we are servants in fiefdoms.
Because the billionaires, the elite, the only thing they can't defeat is poor people coming together, truly coming together. They cannot defeat the collective. So they have to keep pushing it down closer and closer to the individual level because it's the only way that they can survive.
So Jeff has about 2 minutes left before he has to leave.
Oh no, I didn't know you were only going to be here for an hour. I'm sorry.
Would you like to give us a final word, Jeff, before you go?
A final word. I I don't know. I don't. I don't know. I actually just do a little pitch if you don't mind, and that is just simply.
I don't mind at all. Pitch
Okay.
away.
Okay. Good. So, I've been releasing episodes weekly on my podcast for 3 years now. And because of Torrens, in order to concentrate on my studies, but to still keep my podcast going, which is important to me, and to preserve my sanity, I'm lowering that to once a month. So I'm lowering my output by 75%. And kind of to replace that, at least to start, I'm giving. Well, I mean, I'm seriously considering. It feels like a really good idea. A weekly private patron stream, where I just talk with one of my Torrens classmates, or hopefully maybe sometime the professor later on, and so on. We just talk casually live with my patrons, and they get to comment and ask questions. And we talk about the program. We talk about the academic stuff that we're discussing. And I just had my first one with Gabby Bond, who is she's the CEO of Modern Money Lab, which is the owner of the intellectual property of the degree. So they own the academic content, and when other universities want to, do this program, they contact Modern Money Lab to ask to do that, which is pretty cool. So Gabby and I had a nice conversation on Saturday. I have one scheduled with a classmate, Jackson Winter, who I interviewed with for Polanyi. We did basically like our own little book club, and we're having an interview on Saturday, and this is just for patrons. And then I have another one set up, and I don't see why this couldn't be a weekly thing. So if you would consider being a patron, you get to see these patron live streams, and you can keep up with the degree and the subjects we're talking about. And I have actually been ending it with a song. Why not? So I'm a classically trained singer. I'm learning guitar, and I'm ending it so far. I'm ending it with a song, whether it's playing a guitar or singing. So anyway, that is my little pitch. That's all. I'll leave patreon.com/activistmmt. Please consider joining. And thank you both for having me on again. It was nice talking to you both.
Okay, it's a pleasure, Jeff, and thank you very much for being on.
Very much, Jeff. Good luck. Good luck in your coursework.
Thank
We
you.
will
I'm very
certainly
excited.
ask you again soon.
Yes.
Cool. And I look forward to seeing you next semester.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so let's us continue. I see Jeff is still there. So let me.
Sandy's in. Lana's
Hey,
here.
Sandy, how are you? If you'd like to join us as a kind of surprise, okay, I can certainly send you a StreamYard link if you'd like to pop in, okay, and join us while we continue to talk
That
about.
would be really nice, Lana or Sandy.
We can continue to talk about fiscal myths and fiscal truths. So the next one is okay. The myth is we can't keep adding debt to the national credit card. And the next truth is we can keep adding interest-bearing debt to, quote, the credit card, unquote, if we want to, because we can always use the money-creating power to repay our debts whenever they fall due. That said, it makes little sense for the Treasury to borrow back previously issued government money. What ought to be done instead is for Congress to allow the Treasury to mark up its accounts when it needs to spend to satisfy a congressional mandate. A congressional mandate is just another word for an appropriation. And have the Federal Reserve pay interest on its reserve balances if it wants to drain reserves from the economy. So that's the myth, and that's the truth. Would you like to make any comments or questions, Lisa?
What pops into my mind is when Obama gave the speech to the public about balancing the government's checkbook. Folks, the government is not your household. And I know that, like, when you hear things like that, if you're not familiar, it's really easy until you break the cycle of thinking, because you're going to see it come up and you're going to hear it all over the place. It's going to be the New York Times. You'll see it in Washington Post. You're going to see it everywhere. You're going to hear it everywhere. Your neighbors are going to say it. Your doctor's going to talk about it. Bernie says stuff like this sometimes, makes me crazy, makes us all crazy, right? And it's really upsetting when politicians, presidents of the United States, say stuff like this, right? It's because the more you get into this, the more of it's like a psyop that's played on the American people, literally.
It is like a psyop. It is exactly like that. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, I appear to remember that it was Obama who said we can't keep adding debt to the national credit card.
That is correct. He did. He also talked about the checkbook, but you're right. He did. Now that you say
He
that, I'm
said
like, okay,
something
yeah.
like that in one of his State of the Union speeches.
It was a State of the Union address, and we were getting ready for them to level austerity again, right? Because that's what they always do. We go through, like, what, 15-year cycles if we're lucky? And
Yes,
boom, we get smacked down again, and we never recover. People just get used to the fact that, okay, this is my new normal. I don't, my net worth got halved 9 years ago. Here I am again. Now I'm in even bigger trouble, and I'm 9 years older. You've only got so many cycles of 9 years worth of economic pursuits of viability and retirement. If anybody around here is getting there, I mean, the PA state pensioners sure as hell don't seem to be getting there. I really want us to focus on this, because we've got to reach everybody. And I mean everybody. I'm over it. I'm over the two parties. I'm over the fights between the Greens and whatever's going on. We don't have any more time. We have got to work together. We have got to start talking to our neighbors, regardless of who they voted for in 2020, because they're not all bad people. But this narrative has gotten out of control, and it feels like the fringe have taken over. They're holding people hostage in strategic seats they're occupying right now. But we've just come through a dump the incumbents primary season. We're going to head into the general elections. Joe's and I have been discussing how we're moving forward with dump the incumbents on this. If we keep pushing the debunking of this idea of big government and not wanting big government, and this idea of, getting rid of federal government programs, no, that's never going to happen. All they want to do is privatize that money, hand it over to the corporations, suck the profits out of it, deny people care, deny people their pensions, to hell in a handbasket with libraries and God knows what else. But here you go. Here's all your COVID funding. I'm going to release it to the states to fund your police department. Nobody expected that money. That's what you call a windfall.
Yes, right. And some of them are not even using it just to fund the police departments. As we heard last week, the states of Florida and Texas are using some of that the COVID money to transport undocumented immigrants,
People seeking political asylum, political refugees.
political refugees. They're paying for human trafficking.
Yeah, literally.
Human trafficking the migrants to northern cities in
You
order
think it's
to
cute?
embarrass the progressives, who have empathy for the migrants, and in order to put them into the position of showing their values by taking care of the migrants. Okay,
And
it's a
it's not
variation.
even
It's a
not even that
variation
easy.
on what the White Citizens Councils were doing in 1970.
I
They,
don't know that.
yeah, they borrowed this idea from the White Citizens Councils.
Oh, do you think that's where they got this idea?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just what the White Citizens Councils were doing.
Okay. I have a different theory, but okay.
Okay, so yeah, we do have to keep on emphasizing this, keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it until people understand it. The next myth, okay, is another variant on it. It is, if we continue to issue more debt, our main creditors, the Chinese, the Japanese, and our oil suppliers, the Arabs, in other words, may cease to buy our debt, making it possible for us to raise money through borrowing, which in turn would force us into radical austerity or perhaps even into insolvency, which would then be followed by radical austerity and repudiation of our national obligations. So, in this myth, there are a lot of myths that are incorporated into this myth. The truth is, the United States has no need to issue debt instruments to deficit spend. Can it just create the money it needs to do that without selling any debt, quote unquote? On the other hand, our creditors, quote unquote, do need Treasury debt issues to acquire an interest earning zero risk return on the reserve dollars they are holding. So if we,
Need or desire?
uh, well, let's say they desire, they don't really
Yes.
need it,
Yes.
but in other words, they greatly desire to have an interest earning zero risk return on the reserve dollars they are holding. Why is it a zero risk? Because the Constitution mandates that the Treasury pay all its debts.
Mhm.
So there's a constitutional guarantee that the Treasury debt instruments will be paid. So if we provide our debt holders with that opportunity, we're doing little more than providing them with a CD type of investment vehicle rather than taking on a quote debt unquote in a conventional sense. As Warren Mosler suggests, when holders of reserves buy federal debt, it is just like transferring dollars from one's checking account to a savings account holding
Mhm.
term deposits.
Mhm.
So, in other words, what Warren said is that when you own a treasury bond, it's like having a term deposit at a bank.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. So it's not really the kind of debt that you think about when you look at borrowing money from a bank. Comments, questions about that one?
It's a lot for people to grasp initially, and I know that we have newer people in here, but we have people who understand this in varying depths and great understanding, right? But needing to park money, in other words, to tie up some of the cash flow, those needs arise, and we are able to, what I want to say, initiate bonds so that we can take some money out of circulation. There's a lot of reasons for wanting to do that. One of those reasons is that if you give enough people that opportunity, then you make the interest, you set the interest that's going to be borne on those bonds of 10 or 30 years attractive enough for people, then you can actually, if you can sell enough of them, cool things off because there isn't so much money in circulation. Okay. There was another side to this that I wanted to touch on, and I can't remember where my thought process was going.
Okay, let me spell you a little bit on this and say a few more things about it. Okay. One example to note from history, just a historical example. The Australians, sometime back, I think it was in 1978 or 1979, they actually paid off all their federal debt. They were down to zero national debt, okay, as it were. Okay. And private sector investors came to them, came to the government, and pleaded with the government to issue more debt instruments because they thought they badly needed to acquire interest earning zero risk returns on the reserve dollars that they were holding. So they went on their knees to the Australian government, basically. And the Australian government started issuing debt instruments again. But they had actually stopped issuing the debt instruments. So that's kind of an interesting story. The other
So,
story, sorry, go on, Lisa.
well, I always look at this from the standpoint of, I was a banker. I understand, how people want to tie their money up, what kind of yields they want. The stock market became very palpable to people in the 90s and the 80s to some extent. Once computers took off and it wasn't something that was like this obtuse thing that some guy talked to you about every 3 months, your investments in your portfolio, when it became something that the day-to-day person could actually look at, feel comfortable with, start to hold investments and manage them themselves, right? So I guess it was the 90s pretty much when the Scott trades and the Motley Fool and all of that took off.
Yeah, I remember when the Motley Fool took off. It was
Right.
really a big event in Alexandria.
So there's a lot of moving parts to this from the standpoint of, Australia when they did that, when they paid off their debt instruments. Okay. And you said that happened in the 90s?
No, it happened, I believe, in 1978, 1979, or 1980. It was around that time.
Oh.
It was earlier.
Oh, well, and I don't even know what they were thinking. Why'd they do it?
Well, they had surpluses. And
Mm.
so they used the surpluses to pay off the debt. They couldn't think of anything better to do with the surpluses, than pay off the debt. At that time, they were doing very well in the export markets.
Okay.
So they developed these trade surpluses, and so they used the money to buy up all their debt and stop issuing debt. Very interesting.
Well, what did they think that was going to do for them? Because they're a sovereign.
Oh, they
Then why
just
is there a
thought,
sovereign?
well, they didn't understand that they were sovereign. They could issue.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
In other words, they thought that they were like a family and that it
Yeah,
was
I guess that makes
fiscally
sense.
responsible for them to pay off all the debt.
Well, the party in power was probably like, hey, this is going to make everybody think that we are really awesome. Because that would work here
I'm not
too
sure
on.
whether the party was the Socialist Party or the Conservative Party. I'm really not sure.
But see, this is where the politics gets very conflated, right? Because this fear, this uh, economic oppression, this is deliberate. It is. And I know that that is hard for a lot of people to really ingest, not necessarily anybody of us in this room, but for anyone who watches this out there that hasn't seen us before. It is very difficult to hear that we could all be prosperous, that we don't have to have sworn evil enemies. The world, mankind, our interdependencies have become much more apparent in the last even 10 years. I mean, you get exponential growth in shorter and shorter periods of time now. We are interdependent upon one another. We have vast expanses of landmass, rich with natural resources, that because of the consumption of the rest of the world, we can't pretend anymore that they're just our sworn enemies and we're just going to treat them as that. We need to be in the global markets with them. We have to. And the same goes for us here at home. We have to have a strong public education system, and it has been whittled away and whittled away on purpose, literally on purpose, to keep people from getting a good education, to degentrify areas so they can buy up all the property and then, regentrify it. And what happens to all the people that were living there that I guess weren't good enough to be cared enough about to regentrify that area, keeping them in place? This is all about cheap labor, oppression, dominance, workforce, minions, a economic tax base, however you want to look at it. This is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and there has never been a more perfect time to explain MMT, debunk the myths, than right now. Because this economic policy that we are dealing with is nothing more than oppression. And unfortunately, we have transferred so much wealth to the top, and there's no end in sight. Nobody seems to care.
That's right. Nobody seems to care. There was one more point that I wanted to make here. Okay, remember, the beginning of this myth is if we continue to issue more debt, our main creditors, the Chinese, the Japanese, and our oil suppliers, may cease to buy our debt, making it impossible for us to raise money through borrowing, which would force us into radical austerity, or perhaps even into insolvency. Well, now, in the middle of the war, okay, in Ukraine, we're certainly seeing the Chinese, and we're seeing the Russians, and we're seeing some other nations that were holding U.S. debt, the Saudis, beginning to reduce their
They're
U.S.
holding. They're holding. Yeah.
and to take debt, that is denominated in other currencies. And they're making plans, of course, to end the reign of the US dollar as the reserve currency
Mhm.
and to have a market basket, okay, of currencies. So, of course, when that happens, they'll be buying less and less, okay, of our treasury debt, okay, over a period of time. What's
But
going
they're not
to
going to need the dollars.
Well, what's going to happen then? Then the government is going to be faced with a choice of whether it wants to continue issuing debt that's associated dollar to dollar with our deficits, or whether it will accept the inevitable and the authority given to it by the Constitution. I'm talking about the Congress, whether it will accept the authority given it by the Constitution to create money when it needs money to implement its appropriations. Sooner or later, it's going to have to make that choice, if only to pay for its wars.
Yes, it is. It is.
So we're going to have to be watching out for that.
Well, we're going to have to turn over leadership entirely in order to make that happen.
Yep. And of course, that's the big job that we're trying to take on in our dump the incumbents efforts.
Yes, indeed.
We're
Indeed,
trying to
we
make
are.
that happen, and we're trying to accelerate that. And that's going to be difficult. It's been difficult so far. It will continue to be difficult.
Well,
But
you have to remember, though, the premise is to get the big money and the big money takers out of politics, get them out, and make everybody start to understand that your electorate isn't going to tolerate this anymore. So I think we're doing our job. I think it has caught on. Maybe the hashtag dump the incumbents didn't catch on. That doesn't matter. More and more and more, we're seeing our independent news media, be it YouTubers, podcasters, whatever you want to call us, the writers that we trust, that, still get picked up in some of the bigger papers once in a blue moon, but have their own publications now online. This is real now, folks. And it will spread like wildfire because things are going to get much tougher.
we are now seeing, in fact, some of our candidates start to point the money problem out,
Yes, we are.
starting to call out the super PACs, okay, and the PACs in their campaigns. It won't be long before they start to say, you need to dump the incumbents and also the challengers who are taking this money. This money has to be off limits. Only you can make it off limits. And the only way you can make it off limits is by automatically voting against the people who are taking it. That will drive the bad money out of politics and leave only the good money in politics. And what is the good money? It's small dollar donations from people like us. That is the only kind of money that should be allowed in politics.
Well, okay. And people can crucify me for this, but I am done couching any of my thoughts. Criticize away. If I were incredibly wealthy and I wanted to dump a bunch of money on a candidate because I believed in their policies, I'm going to do it. And I would be like, yay, yay. Can I get some more really wealthy people who want to do that? No strings attached, right? You just go straight in.
Okay, so then it would be up to the candidate
whether or not they were going to take it.
Right, but it would also be up to the candidate if they choose to take it.
That's
If
what I
they
said.
choose to take it, then they could make everything transparent. In other words, they could say, look, I took this money from these wealthy people who would like to support me because of my program. Here is my program. And these wealthy people want to improve things here in the United States. And they have signed on to this program. And they are telling me that their funding is no strings attached.
No, I'm telling them that their contribution to me gets them no access. There's no strings attached here. You will not influence what I'm doing, period.
Right.
You just get your donors to sign those contracts. There is a way to do this, okay? And I am not condoning dark money. I am not condoning any, but
Yes,
damn it,
it
you
should all be
can't cut
transparent.
off your nose to spite your face. These politicians know who's up there smoozing and who's connected to what and who's slimy.
Yep,
Okay,
you've got to
but
make that transparent.
some people have money and they're good people. They work on campaigns. They
Yeah,
want things to go well. They believe in all this
like
stuff.
to use it in a good way, and I have never forgotten that our greatest president in the history of the United States, okay, in my view, was from one of the richest families in the United States at that time. Of course, the person I'm talking about, okay, is FDR. And you may argue with me over whether Washington or Lincoln or FDR, okay, was a better president. But I happen to be an FDR man, okay, among all three, okay, of those. Just saying. Okay, let's begin to look at some of these comments. Uh, Going rapidly through the early things. First, I should announce now that there will be a part three of this because there are many more myths to go through. And I believe Matt will be back joining us for part three. So just to give you, a preview of that. So Jeff Denton says George W. Bush created and grew the massive Department of Homeland Security, and Trump grew a ridiculous space force. And then they just threw money at them. What a bunch of hypocrites. And
Yeah,
by
but
the
see,
way,
they don't come out and tout. This is the mistake that I see. They do stuff. They pass legislation. Their voters don't have a clue what just went on.
yeah,
You do not see any policy discussions coming out in the activist community on the right. They talk talking points, they scream big government, they talk about tax and spend Democrats, they want, and they spew the garbage. It's us, the progressives, whatever, I hate freaking labels. People who believe in MMT, people who take very seriously the issues of our time that we know are just oppression, deliberate, oppressive policy. The fact that we don't have clean water anymore, the fact that we don't have housing and that's somehow okay, that we can throw people out of their housing because of a pandemic and we cut off a moratorium that's been put in place, and supposedly we give money to the states so that those people could apply for that money and it could get sent to them so that they could get themselves out of that situation. And you find out, like, what, a month before the whole program's going to get shut down, that only 3% of it had been distributed. How much you want to bet that's another windfall in big old slush funds sitting in the state? Because you never heard anything about it coming back. But Pennsylvania can't fund its pensions. Sorry, but I'm going to hit the things real hard that are going on here.
keep going. So Jesus says, to me, the most sinister thing that I think is happening is that they're trying to privatize water. And Jesus also says, Flint, California, and don't forget Standing Rock. The Waltons want to privatize water, and the Nestle CEO said water is not a right. And Lana Dell says, at Jesus, totally agree. Lana says, yes, Jeff, so frustrating. And the more that people understand that the dollar starts at the Fed level, hopefully these issues will be more easily resolved or avoided altogether. The starving of dollars. Thomas D says needlessly starve, and Lana says that's also a reference to Steve Larchuk, who uses at a money famine as his Twitter handle. Starving indeed. And there's a New Republic article on Maya McGinnis at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. I got it a little garbled when I said CRFB. That's Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. Okay, and Maya McGinnis is the head of that particular committee. She was a protege of Peter G. Peterson, who invested $1 billion in the Peterson Foundation when he started it in 2008. And Thomas D says, laugh out loud. Peterson International Institute of Economics, the number one Bill Foundation, proud of their silly little chicken little sky is falling. USA debt clock, $1 billion to support fools. So just to give more information on what Thomas D is saying, yeah, Pete Peterson used to be the head of the International Institute of Economics, and after he raised $60 million for him, for the IIE, they changed its name to the Pete Peterson International Institute of Economics. Following that, he made a few $1 billion in the stock market during the early 2000s, and he used $1 billion of it to start the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, which then became the centerpiece of the austerity forces in Washington, D.C. Yes, they were the ones who started the debt clock, and the MMTers have pointed out that the USA debt clock is also the USA savings clock, because the amount of the debt actually represents the amount of deficit funding that was spent into the private sector by the federal government and that has not been repaid. The outstanding debt, okay, the national debt, is the value of the principal of the debt instruments that have been sold and were never repaid by the federal government. So the USA debt clock is also the US savings clock. And the MMTers often use that graphic themselves and call it the USA savings clock. They changed the name.
So, Joe, something just hit me and it doesn't make a lick of sense.
Okay.
In an inflationary spiral, why are we building surpluses?
I'm sorry, why are we building?
Why are we building surpluses?
Uh,
Why is Biden reducing our deficit?
Because it's politically popular to reduce the deficit, and because he's a nincompoop.
We're in inflation. Heck, okay, so why doesn't the Fed chair say, hey, Joe, by the way, knock it off. You're making it worse. Why do we not speak truth? At least for our own integrity's sake. My God, we're government officials. We have a responsibility to the rest of the world. I don't understand this, Joe.
The Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve Chair wants Joe Biden to reduce the deficit because at this point, the Treasury Chair believes that the deficit spending is one of the leading causes of inflation.
How could he, Joe? Come on. We're being sold a frickin' script here. This is all bullshit.
How could he? I don't know, but what he's trying to do is to make the interest rates so high so that the flow of money, is frozen and the economy collapses.
Okay, so I'm still trying to get to, why would you want to wreck your own country? That's what I can't get at.
Why would you want to wreck your own country? Well, one of the reasons why Jay Powell wants to do what he's doing is because he only has this one little hammer. He can control the interest rates. He can raise them or he can lower them. Paul Volcker proved that if you raise them high enough, the economy will collapse. And that's all that Jay Powell knows. He knows he doesn't have any other tool. He doesn't know what else he can do to reduce inflation. He has a mandate to reduce inflation.
Yeah, why doesn't the Congress have a mandate to work with the Fed with the tools that they have? Why is this, oh, well, Powell is the only one who can, control inflation, when they all know that's not true?
Because there is no law except the Constitution that can set a mandate for Congress. And so Congress isn't trying to mandate itself. What it's trying to do is to do things that will get them again reelected
Oh, and make them a whole bunch of money. And now
and
we're
make
coming back to the
them
real nitty gritty, aren't we?
a whole bunch of money. They're looking out for their personal interest.
Well, and interest rates on cash reserves benefits the rich.
The interest rates on cash reserves do benefit the rich. And by the way, in the short term, in the short term, the raising of interest rates, okay, until the economy collapses from the sheer weight of it all, raising the interest rates is inflationary, which
Mhm.
means in the short run, the rich will be making more money from the interest payments that they're getting on their bonds.
Or whatever whatever else it is, right? Because
Right,
it just
right.
trickles down.
So in the short run, they are benefiting from it, and also they're in a position to see when the economy is starting to freeze up, and then what they can do is to help the collapse by divesting themselves of property in various areas, and which they do in order to protect themselves.
Well, portfolio redistribution, right?
Portfolio redistribution, yes.
Which is exactly what we don't have any control of. We are just pawns in this big game, which has turned into megalomaniacs,
Yes,
oligarchs.
yes. And Jeffrey Denton says, but it's perfectly fine to give unlimited welfare queen socialism subsidies to the mutant offspring of oligarchs so that they can create unfair monopolies, and who benefits? Well, they do, of course. And anyway, let's skip over.
I feel like I'm watching like a cartoon episode of The League of Justice. Remember that? Maybe some of you are old enough to remember The League of Justice,
The
which was like
Justice League.
the Justice League. That's what it was. Which was like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. I can't remember who else was in it.
Also,
Wonder
Green
Woman.
Arrow. Don't forget Green Arrow.
Wonder Woman. Yes, yes.
Yeah, Wonder Woman. Yeah.
And then you got this like maniacal, horrible genius that wants to control the earth. And that was like always such an ridiculous outlier that would never be our reality. And what comes into my head
Here it is. Our reality.
is
His name is Jeff Bezos.
Bezos. I mean, we can go on, right? You got Musk in there. I mean, we could just go on and on and on and on. And it's our reality now.
It is.
And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we
still,
have got to stop allowing ourselves to be wait, let me finish. Allowing ourselves to be siloed. Okay? If the Greens ignore MMT, that's fine. Befriend them. Keep talking MMT. Sooner or later, they'll get tired of you ignoring their comments. And they will, if we can boil this down and just talk to people, pretend you don't know their political affiliation. Just talk to them. Yep. In the next 4 months, you are going to see people dying in their homes from freezing. in Europe. Freezing. Now, you're not going to see it on our TVs. Well, maybe you will, because they'll probably exploit it from the standpoint of there's, whose fault is it, right? But maybe not. So you're going to have to look for it. But we all know how to get out there and find things because you're here, right? But we are not going to go unscathed on this.
Oh, no, we're not going to go unscathed. If a recession starts in Europe, but not a recession, it's going to be a deep depression there, that's certainly going to feed back to us.
Well, you can't have all of Europe dump into a depression while we've got a major, what are they calling it now? Special military operation for the moment going on with NATO, proxy war, horse shit. Malarkey.
That's kind of ending, and while I remember it, I want to remind people tomorrow night we're going to be discussing Russia's power move, which promises, I think, to end the war much more quickly. But it's a very.
But it's in conjunction with the Ukrainian people, technically. It's pretty cool.
Yes, with much of the Ukrainian people that seems about to vote to join Russia, okay, and to become Russian people. That's going to be very interesting.
I hope it works. It would be beautiful.
I hope it works too. So John B. lets us know the specifics. He says John Howard, Australian PM, but a liberal conservative, ran 11 consecutive surpluses from 1998 through 2006. And that's more than 11. 1998 through 2006 is only 8 years. So there's something wrong with that calculation. But he says it was he who issued debt after financier pleadings. Well, he may have done that, but I am awfully sure, because this example came from Bill Mitchell's blog. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that it happened in Australia. It may have happened twice, but it may have first happened in Australia in something like 1978 or 79. I will double check. And I
think there's a lot of reasons why financiers would want to come and beg and plead. Right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you are a bond broker and there are no bonds, that whole sector of the financier market dries up, right? And those people are used to moving a lot of money.
So Dr. Stephen Hale warns U.S. residents that the liberals in Australia are different from what we consider liberal. Yeah, the liberals in Australia are neoliberals, aren't they?
Well, wait a minute. Isn't that what we have here, neoliberals?
Yep. We have neoliberals in both parties.
So what's the difference, though? I mean, I would love to hear what the difference is, right? Because that depends. Because we have neoliberals here, too. But we also have neocons masquerading as God only knows what they're going to call themselves.
Okay, they have liberals in Australia who are the more conservative of the two major parties.
Okay.
And they also have a Labour Party that has also taken on a neoliberal cast in recent years. And they are a rough equivalent to the Democrats here, except they are more socialist in orientation.
Yeah, well, look what happened to the Labour Party in the UK, in Britain.
That happened.
I mean, for goodness sake. I mean, they might as well have Tories stamped on their foreheads.
So Lana asked, Joe, you mean get rid of PAYGO and do overt congressional financing? Yes, indeed, Lana. I do mean that. John B. says, they care, all right. They care about keeping their position of wealth and power of a common people. They know how macroeconomics really works. The unprecedented transfer of wealth, they always win. Well, we got to stop that, John B. That's That's what we got to do. That's our task. Jesus says, does anyone here listen to any right-leaning channels that acknowledge MMT? If you have links to right-leaning channels that acknowledge MMT,
Please provide.
I would certainly like to explore those links.
There are some right-leaning people who have shows that have a very interesting mix of politics and monetary, but not in the U.S.
Uh, my experience with them is that uh, that some of the libertarians are very entranced by the Austrian School of Economics, which is not at all like the MMT School of Economics. But there are some interesting debates between the Austrian economists and the MMT economists. In particular, Warren Mosler had some interesting debates with a guy by the name of Richard Murphy, I believe. He's a former physicist who lectures on Austrian economics. I mean, maybe he's still a physicist. I'm not sure how you become a former physicist.
Does it work?
Does
I don't know
Austrian
anything
economics
about
work?
Austria. Yeah, I haven't looked into that at anything.
No, it doesn't work. The neoliberal school, as an ideology, incorporated a good bit, of Austrian economics. So did the Pinochet regime in Chile. Monadel says, "Oh, fabulous! I will make a note of that because Jesus says the Stitch and Adam show." Okay, I will look up the Stitch and Adam show. John B. adds, Australian Liberals are similar to US GOP. Australian Labor are equivalent to the Dems, both neoliberal at the executive level of governance. Jesus says, Arita TV guy is right-leaning, but he has the same stance on student loan forgiveness as a progressive would. The video he uploaded today was amazing. Well, thank you, Jesus. Sounds really interesting. Lana says, that seems to match what Dr. Hale says, John. Sandy says, he was the best president, and Eleanor was gem. Yes, she was. Yeah, once I got within, must have been 15 feet, of Eleanor. This was at the Democratic Convention in 1960, in Los Angeles. I was there demonstrating for civil rights. We had a vigil that carried on there for the 5 days of the convention, 24 hours a day. Okay. Anyway, once it happened that on her way to the convention hall with Adlai Stevenson, that she was supporting in 1960, she wasn't supporting Kennedy, she was supporting Adlai. And she and Adlai and their party of people and civil service agents must have passed within 15 to 20 feet of our demonstration in front of the convention. Of course, I was totally carried away to be so close to Eleanor Roosevelt.
Where were you? What city?
Oh, it was in L.A.
It was. Okay.
Right. It was at the L.A. Convention Center at that time, right near the UCLA campus. And right near Watts as well. And we were given lodgings for the 5 days by people in Watts, very generously. And Sandy say, Eleanor carried on after his death fighting for people's rights. She sure did. She was all fire, that lady. She really was. Lana says, doesn't fancy Nancy Pelosi attend the Peterson Foundation events? She does. not only fancy Nancy Pelosi, but Bill Clinton was there for the first 4 or 5 of them. Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. Oh, by the way, Peter G. Peterson got married, I guess, sometime in 1980. Okay, to the lady who was in charge of the Sesame Street show.
Oh, come on, don't ruin it for me. Please, don't
But
do this. You're going to tie him to, next thing you're
Peter
going to do is tie
Peterson
it to
was a
Mr.
clever
Rogers, and
guy
I'm
in
going to
many
not like
ways.
you for a while.
So Dr. Hale is spot on. He has tried to educate Australian Greens as yet to no avail. I've tried to educate the American Greens, okay, to no avail. And Fadl Kaboub also has tried to educate, the American Greens to no avail. But there have been some Greens who got educated. There were 2 Green candidates for Congress who ran in 2018 who were MMT conversant, more than MMT conversant. In fact, one of them joined me in trying to educate the Greens. We were, I was a consultant to their platform committee, and he was a member. He was among the membership who was trying to educate the Greens, okay, on MMT. But they were completely wedded to the philosophy of the American Monetary Institute at that time, and they could not be moved.
Well, okay,
Yes,
so
John B., the Greens ignore MMT.
the groupthink aspect of a party, that was a great illustration of it, Joe, because we work with a lot of Greens, and we know that they know better. But when push comes to shove, they go to the party line.
Howie Hawkins showed a great interest, okay, in MMT, but in the 2020 run.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't really learned it, but he began to express some sympathy for it. And I don't know how seriously he's been learning it. But
Well, there was a big rift on that, Joe.
I'm sorry?
There was a rift on it.
Yeah, there was a risk on it.
No, a rift within.
Oh, inside of the Green Party?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I suspect there is something of a rift in it now. Partly because I think of the success of Stephanie's book that has spread, to many people in the Green Party. And Thomas Easton's laugh out loud. Sandy Deg says, because Biden is a nitwit. And Lana says, John, yikes on the Greens. You just pointed out. Shake my head. And John B. says, the Fed is a consortium of private bankers and financiers. They have a vested interest in accumulating more private wealth than banker profits. Of course, greed prevails. Wealth is addictive. The power is also addictive that comes from wealth.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only reason these people get like this.
I think so. Lana says, Lisa, that's some of the same BS those people were saying to you today. Government spending equals inflation drives me nuts. They want less spending also because they still think their tax dollars is used to pay for it.
Or they know better and push it anyway because it's dominance and it's oppression.
Sandy says, I think many in Congress, Freudian slip that, don't have a clue about MMT. I think you're right, Sandy, but I think that, according to Randy Ray, says he thinks about a third of Congress now have a clue based on his recent experience with Congress. And I think Stephanie agrees with that. They think they've been making progress with Congress.
Well, a third is a paradigm shift, so let's just hope it doesn't take too much longer.
Yeah, let's keep on working for that paradigm shift. I've been at it myself since the end of 2009 now, so it's been taking quite a long time. Lana says, don't forget evil Bill Gates buying up all kinds of property and pushing GMOs. Thomas D says, Kentucky Representative John Yarmouth and those on his committee know MMT. And Sandy Degg and many others know, but are afraid to admit it publicly. Yes, they are.
Yeah, well, who was it who said, I know what you're saying is correct? I
Uh,
can't say it in public?
That
Gore?
at one time, Larry Summers actually, yes, Al Gore said that, but at
Mm-hmm.
one time, Larry Summers said that when MMT was explained to him, I guess along about 2000 or so. I think Larry Summers has been fighting against it ever since then. I think he understood it perfectly well. Sandy Degg says there was an article about Amazon not opening up a distribution center because sales are down. I have to find it. That's very interesting. Thomas says Australian Labor and Australian Liberals. Sandy says, I'm sure if you know, and you're right, they won't speak up. And John B. leaves a link to some Australian fiscal info. Thank you, John B. And Sandy says Grover is a Republican. Laugh out loud.
Who's Grover? Oh, Cookie Monster.
Yeah. And Lana Del says, please remember to play Gabby and Steven's commercial. I'm not forgetting to play it. I don't have it to play. Okay. I need it to play. Now, at one point, okay, I had it here. I got it from Shane, but I guess the real source of it, okay, is Jimmy, and I somehow have to get it from here, but it's not on my pages here. I can't just go to it and play it. If I could, I certainly would. I'm all for supporting Stephen's effort. Uh, and Cookie Monster says, I'm sorry, Sandy says Cookie Monster is a green. And John B says Howie Hawkins is solidly AMI. I'm not sure about that because I interviewed him about a year ago, and he didn't seem solidly AMI to me at the time. He seemed open-minded about learning something new. Lana said, I thought Cookie Monster was blue. Yeah, Cookie Monster is blue, but Cookie Monster might still be a green.
I don't know. There's still a Cookie Monster.
And Sandy says, 1/3. Good to hear, Joe. Yeah, it is good to hear, but it doesn't come from my personal experience, but from Randy's and Stephanie's. So that's that.
Yeah, but until their constituents are educated on it, that's what it is. That's why they don't talk about it, because their constituents, they got to do some teaching.
Yeah, and they don't want to do that. They never want to get out,
It's too risky.
Out ahead of their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather follow their constituents while pretending to lead. That's
Well, I don't even know that anybody looks at any of them as leaders anymore.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I mean, forgive me. There are a few that rise to the occasion. There are a few that surprise me from a policy standpoint every once in a while. But the vast majority of them are useless.
Yeah, which is why we kind of like John Fetterman.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think he's going to be useless.
No,
Lon
he's
says,
not.
what about Bert and Ernie? Probably Bernie followers. Well, Bert and Ernie, Bernie. And Sandy says, definitely. Okay, folks, thanks for coming. This was a fun session. Hopefully, we'll see you tomorrow night when we discuss Russia's power move. It's very, very interesting.
It's very interesting. Please come and listen and invite your friends, because it's not what you think. It's pretty freaking jaw dropping in a good way.
It's pretty freaking smart. actually, because it
Mhm.
kills a number of birds with one stone. And one thing we have to admit, whether we like them or don't like them, and most people don't like them, uh, of all the world's leaders right now, I think the two most impressive as sheer leaders are Putin and Xi.
Yes, I agree there. I agree.
Those guys are brilliant.
And measured and seasoned, and believe it or not, open minded, diplomatic, but fiercely ready to no longer just sit there and take it.
Yep, absolutely. So, on that note, we're going to say goodnight and we'll see you tomorrow.
Sweet dreams.
As
Good night,
usual,
everybody.
sweet
Good
dreams,
night.
everybody. And thank you for coming. And thank you, Lisa.
Hey, Joe, thank you. And thank you, Dolores and Lana and Sandy and everybody that's here.
John
And Thomas,
B.
John B., Thomas D., I have,
and
thank you
Jeffrey
for being here. Jeff
and Dolores,
Denton.
of course. Oh, by the way, uh, tomorrow night we'll be joined by Dolores
Yes, she's coming.
for our conversation on Russian power moves. And I may as well start to advertise right now. We are expecting on Sunday, that is, it's arranged. So, as far as we know, it's going to come off on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We are interviewing Angelica Duenas. It's her third run for Congress, okay, in LA. She is the real deal. I've interviewed her 3 or 4 times before. I can't remember because it started in 2018 and went forward 2020. But it's the first time I've interviewed her here, and each cycle she's improved. Last time she ran in the primary, she got 43% of the vote. Uh, so I think she's really got a shot at it. We're going to interview her at 2 p.m., between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on Sunday, because
Oh,
that's,
Sunday? I thought it was Saturday.
no, it's Sunday.
Sunday? Okay.
All right, because that's when she is available. And also, right now, we're being joined by Ezra Wilson for that as well. So we expect to have a wonderful panel discussion with this great primary candidate. She's Medicare for All. She's student debt elimination. She's also Green New Deal. She's just great.
That's fabulous. I'm looking forward to that. By the way, I saw a Chris Deluzio tweet today.
I did too, and I was pleased
Yeah.
to see it.
I was very pleased to see it. And I did a tweet
Was
for him
the
that
Lucy tweet.
picked up some other congressional districts in PA candidates that were following me. So it's good. I think we're coming down to the wire here. These campaigns are really going to start picking up now. Primary season is over. They know how much money they can anticipate pulling in at the moment. And they're running. Now they're going to run. I've got signs coming to the house because the campaigns are in sign mode now.
Yep.
So it's going to get fun real quick.
Yeah,
Real
right.
quick.
It's going to get hot, and I just gave you the wrong impression, and myself the wrong impression. We are going to have the conversation at 2 p.m. on Sunday with Angelica, but it won't be live streamed. It's going to
It's
be
recorded.
video,
Okay.
right? And so then we are going to rebroadcast it. So Sandy says we ought to rerun it, okay, at 8 p.m. We'll see about that, but we are going to rerun it at a more convenient time for people. I don't know exactly when, but it'll probably be soon after we record it. So,
And Lana, I'll get the Chris DeLuzio tweet and I will dump it in our chat room.
okay, thank you very much. And Chris DeLuzio is a very good candidate as well. I'm sure we'll be talking to him on the dump the incumbents.
I really hope we can get him, but I do want to say this, folks. If your candidate doesn't have on their platform or has yet to make a statement that gives you the warm and fuzzies on a policy issue, hit them up, ask them, call their offices, make a stink, come to us, say, hey, you know what? Candidate looks like they might be pretty good, but they're a little squishy on these, and we'll make a stink. Our whole idea here is not to condemn what isn't written on their website. It's to talk to them and let them know that these are the issues that we want to hear your stances on, because we have got to get these candidates back into the mode of
talking issues.
If you only got platitudes out there and you want to talk to me about values, why in the world would we send them to be lawmakers?
We want to get away from the values bullshit. We want people talking issues, okay, and policies. And then from there, we are perfectly capable of seeing what their values are.
Because here's the thing. I don't really care what their values are. I want to read in their policy stances from what issues they find important if it speaks to my values. Because I'm the voter. They need to sell me, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And they need to be accountable, and values are too vague for them to be held accountable for their values. And why would we hold them accountable for their values anyway? If they support great policies, what do we care what their values are?
Yeah, if you've got the right policy stance, if you're going to vote, if you've told me you're going to vote a certain way so that when you do a bait and switch, it is very simple for me. Oh, okay. I'm going to have to get on them. You have to stay on these candidates regardless, on every issue, every single time something is supposed to come to the floor that they have or have not sponsored, and there's a vote scheduled, which I agree, there weren't many. There weren't many that were on policies and issues that I valued that made any sense. But they're not voting either, deliberately. Okay? We have got to get these candidates to understand that if you want our vote, you are going to have to lay out your planks, your issues, policies around them, your stances on these issues, and we're going to hold you accountable.
Yep.
That's how you get candidates to debate.
Yes.
You got to have a platform. Where do you stand on these things?
Okay, so folks, we're going to say goodnight now. We have a phone call we have to make to our daughter in California.
Oh, cool.
And as I said, we'll see you tomorrow. Okay, and Lisa will talk tomorrow as well.
Yes, we will. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, folks.
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Helen.
Great show, Joe. Nice talk.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.